Hi everyone, I am Batool Abukhadair and today I will be talking about The Wonder. So let me start by telling you what kind of a story this is. Um, this is a story about someone who loses everything that once made life feel stable. Not just a place to live, but people, purpose, and belonging. So The Wonder is an old English poem, but at its heart, it's about a very human experience, which is being alone, remembering the past, and trying to understand what life even means after loss. So, to understand this poem, let's start with we need to think about what really means to lose everything familiar. Okay, so let's imagine this. No, you have no leader to follow, no group to belong to, and no rule that gives your life meaning. So, in Anglo Saxons culture, exile was not just being far away or relocation, it was more being cut close socially, emotionally, and mentally. So, you're alive, but you don't quite exist anymore. So, knowing how serious exile was, it makes sense to ask why the poet focused on this experience so often. So, um, it has been studied for a very long time, but it never settles down. So, they still argue what kind of poem it is: elegy, wisdom poem, reflection. They still argue about it, and honestly I think this confusion is part of the magic of this poem. So the poem refused to explain itself completely. So to understand why exile feels so powerful in this poem, we need to look at the cultural background, right, to understand the whole context. So in Anglo-Saxon society, exile was uh, one of the worst punishments possible. When someone was exiled, they literally lose a protection, belonging, and purpose. Without a community or a lord, the person was extremely unprotected. So that's why exile was often seen as a kind of a social and emotional death. So with this in mind, let's see who's speaking and who's the speaker of this poem. So basically is a person. The speaker is a man alone. He has no lord, no people around, no one to speak to except for himself. So he's not telling a story for entertainment or like just poet. So he's trying literally to survive his own thoughts. And what really he keeps doing is remembering. Okay, so that's the problem. So he remembers sleeping beside his lord, waking up safe, and then suddenly he wakes up alone. So memory becomes crucial here. The happier the past was, the colder and unlive the present feels. So the emotional swing here is built into the poem itself. So let me show you part of the poem. And by the way, the emotion begins immediately with the first word of this uh, poem. Okay, the first word here, the whole poem opens with this word. I don't know how to read it, but it means a solarity one. So this word describes the speaker completely. He is defined by isolation. So exile is not just something that happened to him, it is who he has become, literally. So this sense flows become even clearer when the poem talks about the Lord. So this is one of the sentence from the poem. So it means I can't read it in all English, but he must live without the joy of his Lord. That lines hurts like even today. So the Lord was not just a person, he was the safety, the stability, the meaning. So without him, the joy itself disappears. But actually, the poem doesn't stay frozen in pain. Uh, just remembering talking about, there's a shift. So the key shift in this poem, it moves from personal grief to reflection, and that's why there is the scholars still argue about it. So there is a shift in this poem. The speaker starts thinking about life in general, not only his own pain. His suffering turns into uh, awareness and understanding. So these shifts have help us explain why exile is so important in this poem. So why you think exile matters? Well, exile in this poem is more than a physical separation. It means losing identity, protection, and belonging. And that's why the experience affects the speaker so deeply. So, this idea leads directly to how I approach this poem. So, my focus is I wanted to say was, but it is. Still, my focus is on exile as an inner experience. I see exile as psychological, something that changed how the speaker thinks and feels. Memory and reflection shapes his emotional development. So that actually brings us to the main question of my analysis, which is um, how does the wanderer use exile to move from personal grief to broader understanding? And in order to answer this, I focus on the three main aspects of the poem. The first one, the speaker's voice. So, the speakers begin with sadness, longing, and over time it becomes calmer and more reflective. So, the speaker does not stop grieving, absolutely, but he begins to understand his grief. And what helps that, you can see that through the imagery that support the emotional movement. So, the second aspect was the imagery. The image of winter and cold suggest isolation. The sea represent uncertainty, and ruin shows the loss of past. So these images reflect the speaker's inner emotional state. So together, these images help us to rethink the exile itself. So I reconsider exile. So you can see that the poem suggests that exile is not just only a punishment in that society, it's also a space for reflection and self awareness. So, through exile, the speaker begins to understand the life more deeply. This understanding leads us to insight, right? So, you can say you can see that the poem shows a clear process. Suffering leads to solidate leads to reflection, and reflection leads to wisdom. That means insight grows slowly through isolation, according to um, uh, Jork. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. So that means memory plays an important. You can see that memory really plays a very important role in this process. How is that? Memory makes pain stronger, but also deepens the understanding. By thinking about the past, the speaker understands change and time. Memory helps him reflect uh, instead only suffering. He's still suffering and he's still grieving, but I mean, he also can reflect, not just doing suffering. Okay, so that lead us to very important realization, which is the okay, so that lead us to something very important, which is the impermanence. Impermanence is the speaker realizes that nothing lasts forever, social bonds break, and earthly security fades, and human life is temporary. And this awareness changed how he views his loss. So this complexity explain why scholars still debate the poem. So they still argue what kind of this the poem is, because there is a shift inside this poem. So they still doesn't know what type of it. As I said before at the very beginning of this presentation. So actually, the poem doesn't fit neatly into one category. So it's still, I would say, it can be. It's like it's how you view it. Like it's your angle. So it could be anything. So, but at the end of the day, the poem offers a very clear message. What is it? The message? So it suggests that the exile shapes the understanding, reflection is more important than action, and loss can lead to insight. So this brings us to the final takeaway from this poem. The Wanderer presents exile as a painful but meaningful, uh, and through memory and reflection, sufferings turns into understanding. And I think that's the point. It just like you need to at the end you need to understand, not just like suffering out to, like for no reason, and like just wondering and remembering the past. You need to understand uh life more deeply. So the poem does not remove loss, but it shows how the person can live with it. So to conclude, I would say the wonder presents exile as both painful and transformative. Through memory and reflection, loss become a source of understanding rather than silence. And thanks for listening. I'm waiting for your feedback and any questions do you have in your mind. Thank you.